Section 11, Part 1 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Carroll. The Empire of Business, Section 11, Wealth, Part 1. When President Roosevelt sent his notable message to Congress 7 years ago, calling attention to the unequal distribution of wealth and recommending high progressive taxes upon estates at the death of the owners, the writer sent him a copy of The Gospel of Wealth. The president wrote in reply that he was, quote, greatly struck with the fact that 17 years ago you had it all, end quote. This led the writer to proceed a step further and add another chapter which appeared in 1906. In like manner, the writer held and expressed advanced views upon labor and land before he could be ranked as one of the multimillionaires. He cannot therefore be regarded as only a recent convert to some of the doctrines which are now promulgated so freely. As time has only served to confirm the views then expressed, it is believed that readers will prefer to learn what was written before these questions had come so prominently to the front. The unequal distribution of wealth lies at the root of the present socialistic activity. This is no surprise to the writer. It was bound to force itself to the front, because exhibiting extremes unknown before, it has become one of the crying evils of our day. In the world's progress, scientific discoverers and mechanical inventors appeared and adapted the forces and materials of nature to the uses of man, followed by the commercial and industrial age in which we live, in which wealth has been produced as if by magic, and fallen largely to the captains of industry, greatly to their own surprise. Multimillionaires, a new genus, have appeared, laden with fortunes of such magnitude as the past knew nothing of. The extremes in the distribution of wealth have never been so great as they are today, although salaries and wages have never been so high. This has naturally attracted the attention of the wage earners and others not deluged by the golden showers, and the socialist budget appears as one of the remedies proposed. In The Gospel of Wealth, 1889, the writer advocated graduated taxation upon estates at death of owners, saying, "The growing disposition to tax more and more heavily large estates left at death is a cheering indication of the growth of a salutary change in public opinion. The state of Pennsylvania now takes, subject to some exceptions, 1/10 of the property left by its citizens. The budget presented in the British Parliament the other day proposes to increase the death duties and, most significant of all, the new tax is to be graduated. Of all forms of taxation, this seems the wisest. Men who continue hoarding great sums all their lives, the proper use of which for public ends would work good to the community from which it chiefly came, should be made to feel that the community in the form of the state cannot thus be deprived of its proper share. By taxing estates heavily at death, the state marks its condemnation of the selfish millionaire's unworthy life. It is desirable that nations should go much further in this direction. Indeed, it is difficult to set bounds to the share of a rich man's estate which should go at his death to the public through the agency of the state. And by all means such taxes should be graduated, beginning at nothing upon moderate sums to dependents, and increasing rapidly as the amounts swell, until of the millionaire's hoard, as of Shylock's at least, the other half comes to the privy coffer of the state. This policy would work powerfully to induce the rich man to attend to the administration of wealth during his life, which is the end that society should always have in view as being by far the most fruitful for the people. Nor need it be feared that this policy would sap the root of enterprise and render men less anxious to accumulate. For, to the class whose ambition it is to leave great fortunes and be talked about after death, it will be even more attractive and indeed a somewhat nobler ambition to have enormous sums paid over to the state from their fortunes. Long entertaining such views, there is nothing in the socialist budget, as presented by Mr. Snowden in the Labor Ideal series, which does not commend itself to the writer. It will be noticed, it proposes, as The Gospel of Wealth did 19 years ago, that 1/2 of the deceased millionaire's hoard should go to the state when the estate exceeds $5 million. Mr. Snowden's protest against indirect taxation of commodities is also sound because this favors the rich. One individual does not consume much more of these than another, while the ability of the rich to pay duties is infinitely greater than that of the masses. The American, British, and German tariffs present a great contrast, much to the benefit of the masses of the American people, and this although America, like Germany, is protective, and Britain is free trade. America taxes imports heavily, but these are the luxuries of the rich, which the masses do not consume. The American masses eat, wear, drink, smoke American products. Only the rich wear foreign silks, linens, fine cottons, broadcloths, etc., drink French wines, or smoke Havana tobacco. It is by taxing the importation of these and similar articles that America raises revenue. Thus, in 1907, $216 million was collected upon such luxuries, all paid by the rich who alone use them. Tea, chocolate, and coffee are free. Sugar, formerly free, alone of all food products, yields much revenue, as a protective duty of 2 cents per pound exists upon it at present, intended to stimulate the growth of beets. 500,000 tons of domestic sugar were produced in 1906, and production is rapidly increasing. Thus, the American workman, if he neither smoke nor drink, practically escapes tariff duties, except upon sugar. In Britain, the workman pays not only upon sugar, but also upon imported tobacco, tea, and coffee. The American excise tax upon tobacco is only 6 cents per pound, as compared with 75 cents in Britain. Germany in 1905 imported articles for consumption valued at $595 million. To protect her agriculturalists, she taxes all imported food products, which are consumed by rich and poor alike. The German masses are here more heavily taxed than the British. The distribution of wealth and taxation in Britain, according to Mulhall and later authorities, is estimated as follows. See Westminster Review, February 1908, page 172. 680,000 persons in the rich class, with a combined wealth of $60 billion and $190 million in tax collected. 5,100,000 persons in the middle class, with a combined wealth of $15 billion and $210 million in tax collected. 38,220,000 persons in the working class, with a combined wealth of $5 billion and $200 million in tax collected. The total number of persons is 44 million, with a combined wealth of $80 billion and $600 million in total tax collected. This result is obtained by a combination of imposts, which, taken collectively, tax the different classes of the people on the average in proportion to their income or wages. But if an assessment were made, as it should be, in proportion to accumulated wealth, the figures would appear as follows. Rich class, with a combined wealth of $60 billion and $450 million tax. Middle class, with a combined wealth of $15 billion and $112,500,000 tax. Working class, with a combined wealth of $5 billion and $37,500,000 tax. The total wealth is $80 billion, with $600 million in total tax. From this it would seem that the middle class are charged $97,500,000 above their proper share, and the working class pay $162,500,000 too much, while the rich contribute $260 million less than they should do in proportion to the wealth of their real and personal estate. In other words, about 1.5% of the whole population own the bulk of the wealth, and the rest of the community pay the bulk of the taxes. The statement appears almost incredible, but the matter is of such importance as to be worthy of official inquiry. Those whose incomes are only sufficient to meet physical wants should not be subjected to taxation at all. Adam Smith's dictum, The subjects of every state ought to contribute to the support of government as nearly as possible in proportion to their respective abilities. That is, in proportion to the revenue which they respectively enjoy under the protection of state, should be the rule, especially since there is so much wealth concentrated in the richer classes beyond their most liberal needs. We speak, however, only of the physical needs of men. It should always be remembered by the working man that neither liquor nor tobacco can be considered as needs. The dire consequences resulting from the use of liquor would justify much higher taxation upon it in the interest of the workers themselves. The greatest single evil in Britain today is intemperance. $785 million yearly is the drink bill. How much of this is paid by the working class is, we believe, unknown, but even if it be only one half, here is 392.5 millions worse than wasted by them. The liquor interests have now received title to their drinking places, when before they had only licenses from year to year, a present made to them, as estimated by some, equal to $1,500 million. When one asks himself what would most benefit the worker, there is no hesitation in the reply: to avoid liquor and gambling. The working man who indulges in either is, to the extent he does so, the architect of his own poverty. Here is the issue of greatest moment to the working men. One cannot help those who do not help themselves. One man cannot push another up a ladder. The moment he realizes his grasp, the assisted one falls. It is only possible to really help those who cooperate with the helper. It is not the submerged but the swimming tenth that can be steadily and rapidly improved by the aid of their fellows. The former should be the special care of the state, and should be isolated. Viewing socialism upon its financial side, as shown in Mr. Snowden's budget, its demands are just. A heavy progressive tax upon wealth at death of owner is not only desirable, it is strictly just. So is it just to exempt from taxation the minimum amount necessary to supply the physical wants of men and their families, just as a minimum is exempt from income tax in Britain and the modest homestead is from foreclosure under mortgage in America. There is, however, nothing specially socialistic in this. It is sound Adam Smith doctrine that all should pay taxes only in proportion to their ability to do so, and revolutionary socialism is successfully to be combated only by properly conceding the just claims of moderate men. Wealth is undoubtedly a great factor in civilized life, a very great factor indeed, since civilization itself rests upon it as its foundation. In his essay upon The Gospel of Wealth in the 19th century, Mr. Gladstone pronounced it to be the business of the world. When there was no wealth, there was no civilization. None was possible. All was necessarily savage or barbaric. As long as the first stage existed, and man consumed all that he captured, nothing permanent could be built, there being no reserve fund to draw upon. Man lived in the wilderness, almost as he found it, sheltering himself in huts made of branches or in caves. During the second stage, faint traces of individualism began to appear. In the progress of the race, men displayed different aptitudes. One man could forge swords and make arrows better than another. One could capture more fish, another kill more game, and finally it became profitable for these to apply themselves solely to their respective branches. Specialization began the root of individualism. Then became exchange of products, but after a time barter ceased, and certain articles, wampum, beads, skins, shells, became money in which were invested the savings of men. Then was slowly developed in due progress of time that beneficent gospel, as a man soweth, so he reap reward, according to service. Many things hitherto held in common became private property, and at last, out of the savings of men, capital, durable things were built, and civilization dawned. Even in our own time, not a ton nor a yard of anything can be produced, not a ship nor railroad, not a house, school, university, nor church built, without drawing upon stored-up capital, which is wealth. At first, for a short period, all was the savings of manual labor, but very soon wealth came in much larger amounts due to individuals from various sources, increased value of land, minerals, etc., and then of real estate, new inventions, etc. Thus, wealth is not all the result of manual labor, though the first small surplus was. The greatest growth of wealth from any one source in our times comes from the increased value of real estate upon which little or no labor is bestowed, the increase of population raising the values. According to McPherson, author of Carlyle and Adam Smith, in the famous Scots series, we have to charge the greatest of economists, Adam Smith himself, with having made a slip to the effect that the wealth of a nation is the creation of labor, out of which sprang the other error that labor is the measure of the exchangeable value of commodities. Marx took up these mistaken ideas and justly decided that they led to the conclusion that capitalistic profit is simply the surplus value obtained from unpaid labor. In extenuation of Smith's slip, it should be remembered that in his day our system of gigantic production in huge establishments had not begun. People generally labored in their own homes, and wealth accumulated slowly. All is changed, and Marx's theory is abandoned by the leading socialists today who reject his special contributions to pure economics. His theory of value meets with little support. But the great mass of socialistic working men have not yet reached this stage. Still, the error, having been wounded, must soon die among its worshippers, as error always does. It is easily demonstrated to be an error. For instance, the greatest increase of any single department in wealth arises from increased value of land. The rateable value of the city of London in 1870 was £2,266,842, or $11,334,210, and is now £5,451,820, or $27,259,100. The corresponding figures for the whole metropolis are £18,719,237, or $93,596,185, and £44,351,000, or $221,755,000. The valuation of New York City has increased from $4,751,532,826 in 1903 to $6,240,480,602 in 1907. In the whole of the United States, as quoted elsewhere, the census shows that from 1890 to 1900, the value of real estate increased from $39,544,544,333 to $52,537,628,164, an increase of $12,993,083,831, 3.5 times the national debt of Britain. It is clear that wealth mainly created by increase of population is not to be credited to labor, for little additional labor was expended. The labor of tilling the soil was compensated for by the crops and did not add to the valuation. That value depends upon and is the result of labor can be exploded thus. The late Duke Sutherland, in his praiseworthy desire to improve conditions upon his vast Highland estates by making the land support his people at home, expended for years the labor of many men and vast sums in the effort. Few dollars of value were created. The effort failed. Chantry spends a year upon a statue, and it brings $5,000. Another man works twice as long and twice as hard, yet his statue is practically worthless. Both labored, but purchasers wanted the one statue and did not want the other. Thus the wants of the purchaser and not the labor expended fixes value. So with all forms of labor. If there be a demand, i.e. a purchaser, for it at a certain price, For price is a potent factor. What labor produces has value. If not, labor expended is labor lost. The result is that labor is not employed upon articles not in demand. Thus, labor neither creates nor fixes value. The law of supply and demand does so. The employer engaged in manufacturing is compelled to meet the wants of the people, his customers. The interest of the employer and employee, capital and labor, in doing so are mutual, not antagonistic. Marx predicted that machinery would extend the hours of labor and depress wages so much that he foresaw the time when employers would get the labor of a whole family for what they had paid for the head alone. He denied that any share of increased profits could fall to the workers so long as capital had control of machinery. The reverse of all this has been the result. Hours of labor have been reduced, wages increased, and a great advance has been made in the position of wage earners under the new conditions of production. The proofs of this gratifying result, especially during the past 20 years, are among the most welcome evidences the optimistic well-wisher of the working class receives that all goes well, though not quite so fast as we and other reformers most ardently wish. After making full allowance for differences in men, it still remains true that contrasts in their wealth are infinitely greater than those existing between them in their different qualities, abilities, education, and, except the supreme few, their contributions to the world's work. It should be remembered always that wealth is not chiefly the product of the individual under present conditions, but largely the joint product of the community. Let us go to the root of the matter and inquire how fortunes are created, whence and how they arise. This the writer has recently attempted to do in the following manner. Imagine an honest, hard-working farmer who finds himself able to give each of his 2 sons a farm. They have married admirable young women of the neighborhood, of good kith and kin, friends from youth, no mistakes about their virtues. The sons find farms, one in the center of Manhattan Island, the other beyond the Harlem. They cast lots for the farms as the fairest method, thus letting the fates decide. Neither has a preference. The Harlem farm falls to the elder, the Manhattan to the younger. Mark now the problem of wealth, how it develops. A few $100 buys the farms, and the loving brothers set out for themselves. They are respected by all, loved by their intimates. To the extent of their means, they are liberal contributors to all good causes, and especially to the relief of neighbors who through exceptional troubles need friendly aid and counsel. They are equally industrious, cultivate their farms equally well, and in every respect are equally good citizens of the state. Their children grow up and are educated together. The growth of New York City northward soon makes the children of the younger millionaires, while those of the elder remain simple farmers in comfortable circumstances, but fortunate in this beyond their cousins, still of the class who have to perform some service to their fellows and thus earn a livelihood. Now, who or what made this difference in wealth? Not labor, not skill, no, nor superior ability, sagacity, nor enterprise, nor greater public service. The community created the millionaire's wealth. While he slept, it grew as fast as when he was awake. It would have arisen exactly as it did had he been on the Harlem and his brother been on the Manhattan farm. The younger farmer, now a greater property holder, dies, and his children in due time pass away, each leaving millions, since the farm has been part of the great city, and immense buildings upon it produce annual rents of hundreds of thousands of dollars. When these children die, who have neither toiled nor spun, what canon of justice would be violated were the nation to step in and say that since the aggregation of their fellow men called the community created the descendants' wealth, it is entitled to a large portion of it as they pass away. The community has refrained from exacting any part during their lives. The heirs have been allowed to enjoy it all, because although in their case the wealth was a purely communal growth, yet in other cases wealth often comes largely from individual effort and ability, and hence It is better for the community to allow such ability to remain in charge of fortune making, because more likely to succeed and in doing so develop our country's resources. It would be unwise to interfere with the working bees. Better allow them to continue gathering honey during their lives. When they die, the nation should have a large portion of the honey remaining in the hives. It is immaterial at what date collection is made, so that it comes to the national treasury at last. That by far the greatest amount of wealth created in any branch comes from enhanced values of real property is especially true in a prosperous country, increasing rapidly in population like the United States. The census shows that from 1890 to 1900, the value of real estate increased from $39,544,544,333 to $52,537,628,164, an increase of $12,993,083,831, $1,300,000,000 per year, over $3,500,000 per day. The obvious creator of this wealth is not the individual, but the community, as we see in the case of the two brother farmers. Property may pass through many proprietors, each paying more for it than his predecessor, but whether each succeeding owner sells to his successor at a profit depends almost solely upon whether the surrounding population increases. Let population remain stationary, and so does values of property. Let it decline, and values fall even more rapidly. In other words, increased population, the community, increases the wealth in each successive generation. Decrease of population reduces it, and this law holds in the whole of that vast and greatest field of wealth, real estate. In no other field is the making of wealth so greatly dependent upon the community, so little upon the owner, who may wholly neglect it without injury. Therefore, no other form of wealth should contribute to the nation so generously. Let us now trace the acquisition of wealth by the active businessman who has some personal part, and often not a small one, in creating it. Imagine 5 brothers, sons of another hard-working farmer. The first settles in New York City, the second in Pittsburgh, the third in Chicago, and the fourth in Montana. The first sees that railroads in every direction are essential to the coming metropolis, devotes himself to this field, and obtains large interests therein. As the population of the country increases, and that of New York City bounds ahead into the millions, these lines of transport laden with traffic justify increasing bonded debt. Having the figures under his eye, he sees that the shares of these railways are sure to become dividend-paying, that even already there are surplus earnings beyond the bonded interest, which, if not needed for pressing extensions, could be paid in dividends and make the stock par. He strains his credit, borrows great sums, buys the shares when prices are low, and floating upon a tidal wave of swelling prosperity caused by the increased traffic of rapidly increasing communities, he soon becomes a multimillionaire. And at his death, his children are all left millionaires. In the consolidation of the various short lines into one great whole, there was margin for a stupendous increase of capital. And in other collateral fields, there lay numerous opportunities for profitable exploitation. All, however, depended upon an expanding population for increased values. Now, while the founder of the family must be credited with remarkable ability and with having done the state some service in his day and generation, it cannot be denied that the chief creators of his wealth were the increasing communities along the railroads, which gave the traffic that lifted those lines into dividend payers upon a capital far beyond their actual cost. In the work and its profits, the nation was an essential partner, and is equally entitled with the individual to share in the dividends. The second son is so fortunate as to settle in Pittsburgh when it had been just discovered that some of the coal fields of which it is the center produced a coking coal admirably adapted for iron ore smelting. Another vein easily mined proved a splendid steam coal. Small iron mills soon sprang up. Everything indicated that here indeed was the future iron city, where steel could be produced more cheaply than any other location in the world. Naturally, his attention was turned in this direction. He wooed the genius of the place. This was not anything extraordinarily clever. It was in the air. He is entitled to credit for having abiding faith in the future of his country and of steel, and for risking with his young companions not only all he had, which was little or nothing, but all they could induce timid bankers to lend them from time to time. He and his partners built mills and furnaces, and finally owned a large concern making millions yearly. This son and his partners looked ahead. They visited other lands and noted conditions, and finally concluded that a large supply of raw materials was the key to permanent prosperity. Accordingly, they bought or leased many mines of iron ore, many thousands of acres of coal and of limestone, and also of natural gas territory, and at last had for many long years a full supply of all minerals required to produce iron and steel. This was sound policy, but it did not require genius, only intelligent study, foresight, and good judgment to see that. They did not produce these minerals. They saw them lying around open for sale at prices that are now deemed only nominal. Much of the wealth of the concern came from these minerals, which were once the public property of the community, and were easily secured by this fortunate son and his partners upon trifling royalties. Their venture was made profitable by the demand for their products, iron and steel, from expanding population engaged in settling a new continent. Without new populous communities far and near, no millionairedom was possible for them. The increasing population was always the important factor in their success. Why should the nation be denied participation in the results when the gatherers cease to gather and a division has to be made? The third son was attracted to Chicago and quite naturally became an employee in a meat-packing concern, in which he soon made himself indispensable. A small interest in the business was finally won by him, and he rose in due time to millionairedom, just as the population of the country swelled. If Chicago today, and our country generally, had only the population of early days, there could have been no great fortune for the third son. Here, as before, it was the magnitude of the business based solely upon the wants of the population that swelled the yearly profits and produced prodigious fortunes. The fourth son, attracted by the stories of Hecula and Calumet and other rich mines, which far surpassed the wealth of Ormus or of Ind, settled in Montana, and was lucky after some years of rude experience. His ventures gave him the coveted millionairedom. The amount of copper and silver required by the teeming population of the country and other lands kept prices high, and hence his enormous profits mined from the land for which only a trifle was paid to the general government not so long ago. He did not create his wealth. He only dug it out of the mine as the demands of the people gave value to the previously worthless stones. Here especially we cannot but feel that the people who created the value should share the dividends when these must pass into other hands. The fifth son had a melancholy career. He settled in New York City while young, and unfortunately began his labors in a stockbroker's office, where he soon became absorbed in the fluctuations of the exchange, while his fond mother proudly announced to all she met that he was in business. From this, the step was easy to taking chances with his small earnings. His gambling adventures proved successful. It was an era of rising values, and he soon acquired wealth without increasing values. For speculation is the parasite of business, feeding upon values, creating none. A few years and the feverish life of the gamester told upon him. He was led into a scheme to corner a certain stock, and, as was to have been expected, he found that men who will conspire to entrap others will not hesitate to deceive their partners upon occasion if sure it will pay and is safe from exposure. he ended his life by his own hand. His end serves to keep his brothers resolute in the resolve never to gamble. The speculator seldom leaves a millionaire's fortune, unless he breaks down or passes away when his ventures are momentarily successful. In such a case, his ill-gotten gold should be levied upon by the state at the highest rate of all, even beyond that imposed upon real estate values. Wealth is often, we may say generally, accumulated in such manner as benefits the nation in the process. Here it demoralizes the getter as well as the people and lowers the standard of ethics. It is taken without returning any valid consideration and ranks with gamblers' games. End of section 11 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. Recording by Tom Carroll. Section 12, Part 2 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Carroll. The Empire of Business, Section 12, Wealth, Part 2. There is one class of millionaires whose wealth, in very much greater degree than others, may be credited to themselves, inventors. Graham Bell of the telephone, Edison of numerous inventions, Westinghouse of the air brake, and others, who originated or first applied processes hitherto unused, and were sufficiently alive to their pecuniary interests to hold large shares in the companies formed to develop and introduce them to the public. Their wealth had its origin in their own inventive brains. All honor to the inventor! He stands upon a higher platform than the others. It may be said that in greater or lesser degree our leading manufacturers, railroad builders, department store projectors, meat packers, and other specialists in one line or another had to adopt new methods, and, with few if any exceptions, there can be traced in their careers some special form of ability upon which their success depended, thus distinguishing them from the mass of competitors. No doubt this is correct, yet the inventions or processes used were the work of others, so that all they did was to introduce new methods of management or to recognize and utilize opportunities. This the inventor class have also done if they have become millionaires. But in addition, they have invented the new processes, so that these deserve to reap beyond the other class, yet only in degree, because both classes alike depend upon increasing population, the masses, who require or consume the article produced, so that even the inventor's wealth is in great part dependent upon the community which uses his productions. It is difficult to understand why, at the death of its possessor, great wealth gathered or created in any of these or in other forms should not be shared by the community which has been the most potent cause or partner of all in its creation. We have seen that enormous fortunes are dependent upon the community. Without great and increasing population, there could be no great wealth. Where wealth accrues honorably, the people are always silent partners. It is not denied that the great administrator, whether as railroad builder, steamship owner, manufacturer, merchant, or banker, is an exceptional man, or that millions honestly made in any useful occupation give evidence of ability, foresight, and assiduity above the common, and prove the man who has made them a very valuable member of society. In no wise, therefore, should such men be unduly hampered or restricted as long as they are spared. After all, they can absorb comparatively little, and generally speaking, the money-making man, in contrast to his heirs, who generally become members of the smart or fast set, is abstemious, retiring, and little of a spendthrift. The millionaire himself is probably the least expensive bee in the industrial hive, taking into account the amount of honey he gathers and what he consumes. Practically every thousand of his money is at work for the development of the country and earning interest, much of it paying labor. In the interests of the community, therefore, he should not be disturbed while gathering honey, provided it be destined largely for the general hive, under a just system of taxation when he passes away. Those who have not had opportunity to study the operation of wealth in the world are naturally led astray. They see its possessors in their palaces, surrounded with every luxury, their gorgeous carriages in the park. They read of their extravagant balls, of riotous living and inordinate expenditure, and worse than this, of gambling at cards and upon horses. Horse racing in Britain, unfortunately, is still under the highest patronage, sights naturally hard to bear by those suffering for the necessities of life. The writer has no desire to minimize this sad contrast, nor to say one word in its defense. It is one of the saddest and most indefensible of all contrasts presented in life. But when we proceed to trace the work of wealth as a whole, it is soon found that even these extravagances absorbed but a small fraction of it. The millionaire's funds are all at work. Only a small sum lies in bank, subject to check. Our railways and steamships, mills and furnaces, industrial structures, and much of the needed working capital to keep these in operation are the result of invested wealth. The millionaire with 2, or the new multimillionaire with 20 millions sterling, keep only trifling sums lying idle. All else they put to work, much of it employing labor. They cannot escape this unless they turn misers and keep the gold to gloat over, which no rich man does whom the writer knows or has heard of. On the contrary, the millionaire as a rule is both mindful and shrewd, more apt than those of smaller fortune to invest his capital carefully. Besides, he is usually a man of simple tastes and averse to display. Whatever impressions the workers may receive of the wealthier classes, the fact is indisputable that their surplus money, minus a small fraction, must augment the wage fund, and in some line or other benefit those who labor. Even their extravagances must in their course contribute to the business of many people struggling to obtain a competence, and hence to employment of labor. Little can be spent by the rich without drawing upon the labor of others, which must be paid for. All that millionaires can get out of life is superior food, raiment, and shelter. Only a very small percentage of all his millions can be absolutely wasted. When the socialist, therefore, speaks of all wealth going back to the state, he proclaims no great change in its mission. The state, sole owner, would use it just as the owners now use all but a fraction of it, that is, invested in some of the multiform ways leading to the reward of labor. It is simply a question whether state as against individual control of wealth would prove more productive, which, judging from experience of state and individual management so far as yet tested, may gravely be doubted. It could not make much difference to the workers whether the title to wealth rested in the state or in individuals, if the state decided, as individuals do now, to recompense labor according to value as determined by demand, the fairest standard. All would remain very much as now. One would still get 5 talents, 1 10, and a few would get very many talents, and individualism would reign. The bridge has yet to be found that spans the gulf between equal and unequal compensation for varied service. Yet, until this be found, we believe it to be non-existent and impossible to devise, there can be no communism, nor indeed any milder form of socialism to which serious objection need be made by earnest improvers of present conditions, since the absorption of private property and equal compensation, the 2 pillars of revolutionary socialism, are inevitably relegated to the distant future until a practicable mode of obtaining and managing them be found. We hear far too much these days upon the subject of wealth as the main object of life. Only by the manual working man and poorer classes is money regarded as the great idol of our age, before which all fall prostrate, and this simply because it is their one pressing want, and its acquisition their life work. True, wealth is displacing hereditary rank, which until our own day held foremost position in Britain. Now the poor, average hereditary peer seeks its alliance and remains of little consequence unless successful, because compelled to maintain an ostentatious style of living, which, without fortune, is impossible. He bargains for an heiress because his position depends not upon his merits, but upon her wealth. This applies only to the small United Kingdom, for among our English-speaking race elsewhere throughout the world, hereditary rank is unknown. It is a survival of the past, which raises a smile, for it is amusing to watch titled personages assuming positions in state or society solely because someone who preceded them won precedence. Let this be noted by the workers. None of the professions regard great wealth as the chief prize. Its acquisition is not their aim. Consider the physician. When a man selects that noble career, knowing all its trials, and consecrates himself to the amelioration of human suffering, he knows well fortune is not there to be found. He has a much higher prize than wealth in view. Consider the minister who feels that he has a message to deliver to his fellows, and, answering, embraces the call. Wealth does not allure him. So with the lawyer. Wealth is not in his mind as the reward of his labors. The chief justices of the Supreme Courts are above pecuniary gain. The inventor, the architect, the engineer, and the scientist all have nobler rewards before them than riches. Only a modest competence is the reasonable expectation of all these classes. The great teachers of their fellows, the presidents and the professors of our seats of learning, and the teachers of our common schools, what thought have they of bowing before the vulgar idol of wealth? Our poets, authors, statesmen, the very highest types of humanity are above the allurements of money-making. These know of higher satisfactions and nobler lives than those of the mere millionaire. Having their nobler missions, they have no time to waste accumulating dross. All these men are quite right, for beyond a competence for old age, which need not be great and may be very small, wealth lessens rather than increases human happiness. Millionaires who laugh are rare. The deplorable family quarrels which so often afflict the rich generally have their rise in sordid differences about money. The most miserable of men, as old age approaches, are those who have made money-making their god. Like flies bound to the wheel, these unfortunates fondly believe that they were really driving it, only to find, when tired and craving rest, that it is impossible for them to get off, and they are lost. Plenty to retire upon, but nothing to retire to, and so they end up as they began, driving to add to their useless hoards, passing into nothingness, leaving their money behind for heirs to quarrel over, only because they cannot take it with them. A melancholy end, much less enviable than that of their poorer fellows. Wealth confers no fame, although it may buy titles where such prevail. Nor are the memories of millionaires as a class fondly cherished. It is a low and vulgar ambition to amass money, which should always be the slave, never the master of man. There is one fundamental difference between rank and wealth. There can be no hereditary aristocracy of wealth. Where it is left free as a rule, it passes in 3 generations from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in all English-speaking lands except the United Kingdom, where the law of primogeniture and legal settlements guard a hereditary class and defeat the operation of the natural law. In free lands, the children of millionaires and their children may be safely trusted to fulfill the law. To keep a fortune is scarcely less difficult than to acquire it. Wealth is dispersive where unbuttressed by special laws designed to keep it in certain channels, all of which laws should be promptly repealed. Wealth in America, the land of greatest fortunes, never yet has passed beyond the 3rd generation. It seldom gets so far. We have a very few families of the 3rd generation now spending the fortunes made by their grandfathers. The 2 or 3 greatest fortunes of their day are now being freely distributed among the children and grandchildren, and will be reduced to moderate sums for each when the present children reach maturity. As certain as fate, many of their descendants will be found toiling as their able ancestors did in their shirt sleeves. We may safely trust those who have not made the money to prove adepts in squandering it. Great fortunes are few. The aggregate wealth embraced in these is small compared with the amount in very moderate fortunes. The former attract attention far beyond their importance. Gigantic fortunes, in the nature of things, must be fewer and harder to build up in the future than the past. Most great enterprises are now in corporate form. The writer knows of but one man now in active business who is likely to have an exceptionally large estate, and the foundation of that was laid more than half a century ago by the purchase of timberlands, which have increased enormously in value. We can safely trust to the free play of natural forces under progressive taxation, if not thwarted by legislation as in Britain, to prevent danger or injury to the state arising from hereditary wealth. The equal distribution of wealth is one of the loudest cries of the socialist. Let us suppose that a philanthropist, which generally means a man with more money than sense, resolved to act upon that idea and distribute his fortune among the poor of London or New York, went to them one morning and announced his purpose. He is soon surrounded and begins the distribution. Each man or woman gets pro rata, say, £5 until many thousands are given away, the crown still constantly increasing. He returns at night to witness the result, and shudders at the vision that presents itself. Are these indeed men and women, or are they degraded wretches in human form? Is it not evident to all that the first and indispensable work of the socialist is the elevation of humanity to that standard of conduct which would ensure the wise and sober use of benefactions? We would all agree that when this necessary elevation was reached, the discussion of further steps to relieve distress would be in order. Meanwhile, the foolish distributor would have done more injury to his fellows in one day than he could probably do good all the rest of his life. "Down on your knees and crawl for pardon" are the words one would undoubtedly apply to such a philanthropist. Imagine every man, woman, and child in Britain receiving £250, or $1,250, which is one's proportion of the national wealth, if equally divided. What would be the result? Saturnalia for a time, then rich and poor, as before slowly emerging, the last state worse than the first. It is self-evident that there is at present no foundation upon which wealth can be equally distributed. The soil has not been prepared. Seed sown upon it would be choked by thistles. Meanwhile, our immediate duty is to distribute surplus wealth to the best of our abilities in such forms as we believe best calculated to improve existing conditions, and to secure its more equitable distribution hereafter by heavy progressive death duties, and by assessing the people in proportion to their ability to support the government. This policy President Roosevelt is strongly advocating in America. It is much more urgently needed in Britain. Socialists generally write of wealth as if possessed by the few, but the fact must never be lost sight of that the laboring classes, in the aggregate, are great capitalists. The savings banks of New York State alone in 1906 held $1,335,000,000, owned by 2,637,235 depositors. Average deposits of $506.25. This is all the savings of the workers, for businessmen and capitalists use their money to better advantage. These banks are strictly confined by charter to investments in first-class securities, are carefully managed, and possess the confidence of the people. In the United States, the deposits in savings banks amounted to the grand total of $3,482,000,000. But this is no measure in the total savings of the working people, because in America, especially in the Western states, opportunities for more profitable investment of savings are numerous, and the rapid increase of values in real estate leads workmen to prefer investing in homes. When we consider the vast sums invested by the workers in homes, insurance cooperative, and friendly societies, and in other ways, and add these to the foregoing, the problem which the socialist writes about so glibly of transferring all wealth to the state begins to assume its true proportions. We quote from The Service of Friendly Societies by Alexander Cargill. Quote, "Here is as brief a summary as possible of the position of the registered societies throughout the country, I mean in Great Britain and Ireland, as at the date of the last public return, namely 31st December 1902. First of all, we have the friendly societies, pure and simple, including all their branches, collecting societies, benevolent societies, working men's clubs, medical, etc., and it will interest you to know that the number of friendly society members on the date mentioned was 13,344,494, their funds at the same date being £44,848,575. Next, there are the cooperative societies for industries and trades, businesses and land societies. The membership of these was 2,054,835, and their funds £43,328,078. Then we have the trade unions, which have a membership of 1,604,812 and funds amounting to £5,016,408. Workmen's compensation schemes with a membership of 122,441 and funds of £172,408. Friends of Labor Societies with a membership of 32,684 and funds of £254,426. Coming to the building societies, of which there are two kinds, the incorporated and the unincorporated. Together they have a total membership of 595,451, with funds amounting to £63,907,087. Lastly, we have the total certified trustee and post office, people's, and railway savings banks. These have no fewer than 10,837,186 depositors, and their funds amount to £222,677,941. Totaling all these figures together, we reach an aggregate membership of nearly 29 million, with combined funds amounting to £400 million sterling. End quote from The Service of Friendly Societies by Alexander Cargill. We give a few figures from the United States Statistical Abstract of 1906, showing deposits in postal and other savings banks in various countries in 1905. In Britain, there were $997 million in deposits, 11,694,000 depositors, with an average of $85. In Denmark, there were $205,723,000 in deposits, 1,291,000 depositors, an average of $159. In Germany, there were 2,639,590,000 in deposits, 16,613,000 depositors, with an average of $159. In France, there were $890 million in deposits, 11,768,000 depositors, with an average of $75. The aggregate of all countries which make returns is 91,273,000 depositors, with 11,801,229,509. These enormous sums are laid up where neither moth nor rust can corrupt, nor thieves break through and steal. Their only danger lies in the socialistic aim to remove them from present owners and transfer them to the state, thus making the depositors' money the property of all. To return the deposits to the rightful owners or allow interest upon them would create a large capitalistic class apart from the general socialistic community, which would involve class distinctions as before, fatal to the socialistic idea. The British Islands, with their 11.5 millions of depositors in a population of, say, 45 millions, have an average of a fraction of more than one depositor in every family, allowing 5 to each. Serious trouble might be expected if the socialist ceased to confine himself to writing about placing all wealth in the hands of the state and begin to act. Fortunately, of this there is no danger. One of the chief objections to present-day socialism is that while it lends itself to endless talk, it is yet doomed to inaction as a system until and unless human nature itself is changed in the countless ages to come. Earnest and good men, touched to fine issues, should not occupy themselves grasping at distant shadows, while the substance, improvement of the present, lies at their feet ready for treatment. There are 3 classes of men. The first are born in poverty, and probably have to see the harrowing sight of father and mother, sister and brother, suffering from want. As a holy duty, they resolve to drive the wolf from the door and make fortunes. Young men with such experiences go into the world resolved to win. They must win, and the business life furnishes their best chance of victory in our time. Their foot once upon the ladder, it was comparatively easy climbing, even in Britain until recent times, for it was the center of material development in the early part of last century. In America, it has long been and still is much easier to accumulate wealth than elsewhere. The Republic is soon to dwarf all other civilized countries in wealth and population. It is the land of millionaires, and the new genus of multimillionaire has just made its appearance there. Notwithstanding this, what has been said of the professional classes is eminently true of those of the Republic. Its best men and women have little in common with the makers and possessors of vast fortunes as a class. Not that those born in poverty should not aspire to higher positions, enabling them to influence others more potently for good. Not that they should not gather gear by every wile that's justified by honor. For it is, as a rule, only after man has provided for himself and family that he can be of much lasting good to others. He must surely recognize this to be his first duty. But if any provide not for his own, and specially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and is worse than an infidel. A few, a very few exceptional men and women appear at intervals in the world who seemingly need to take little thought of themselves, or those dependent upon them. Their fellows are captivated with their devotion to the general weal, and provide for them. But such characters are rare, and as a rule it is necessary for all to take care of themselves as the first duty. The never-to-be-forgotten truth is that huge fortunes, so far as their owners are concerned, are as useless as star and garter are to their possessors, and not so ornamental. And this truth above all, that these fortunes cannot give their owners more out of life worth having than is secured by a competence so modest that men beginning as workers can, with health, ability, and sobriety, win for old age. We have prominent instances of this among the working men, members of Parliament scattered throughout Britain, America, Canada, and Australasia. John Burns, Cabinet Minister, one of the most remarkable working men. The late Sir Randall Cremer, Thomas Burt, and others stand at the head. Several have reached the highest office upon earth, the presidency of the majority of the English-speaking people. This is only what we have right to expect, for not a few of the greatest geniuses have been manual workers. In new countries, millions of men who began as manual workers have achieved moderate competence. Almost without exception, the millionaires of today have made their millions. It goes without saying that they had to be very economical at first, and neither drank, smoked, nor gambled. One, when asked how he made his first 1,000, replied, "That's very simple. I didn't spend it." The second class of men court fame, not so mercenary but vainer than the first. Their sole desire, as expressed by Hotspur, quote, "Methinks it were an easy task to pluck bright honor from yon pale-faced moon, or at a bound to dive into the vasty deep, and drag up drowned honor by the locks, so I might without co-rival wear all her dignities." And so the vain peacock struts across the stage. The third class appears murmuring, "I go forth among men, armored in a pure intent. Great work is to be done, and whether I stand or crownless fall, it matters not, so God's work be done. For I have learned to prize the lightning deed, nor heed the thunder following, after which men call fame." End quote. To this class may belong every honest, earnest, sober, brotherly working man who plays well the part assigned to him. It is a truth that should be pondered over by all, that for failure in life, as a rule, the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves. We must all learn the great truth that only competence is desirable, almost necessary, wealth non-essential, and when it does come, it is only a sacred trust to be administered for the general good. When this lesson is truly learnt, the thirst for wealth will lessen, and it will cease to be the object of keen pursuit by men in general, which it never has been with professional classes. People will soon see that it does not bring happiness to its possessors, and is generally injurious to their children. The wise man engaged in business will seek only a moderate competence, and then devote himself to public affairs, laboring for the good of others, especially in his own community. The writer has had occasion to visit many cities and meet the civic authorities, mayors, and members of council. Deeply impressed he has been with their characters and abilities, and especially with the large number who have risen from the ranks of the poor to eminence. Not seldom the mayor has done so. Much of their time is devoted to the careful management of municipal affairs, although few have ceased to pursue their regular occupations. They are happy in leading useful, worthy lives, conscious that they labor no longer solely for themselves, but for their less fortunate fellows. It is cheering to find that working men can and do rise so often to high positions and perform great public service in their maturer years. Useful and happy lives these men lead, striving in their later years to improve the conditions of life for their neighbors, thus making one little spot of earth just a little bit better than they found it. That spot, in many cases, the dearest spot on earth to them, the spot where they were born. For useful service to others, for personal happiness and sweetest satisfaction, for all that makes life desirable and hallows departure at last, millionaires, as a class, have good cause to envy the town councilors. Mayors, provosts, and councilmen should hesitate long before desiring exchange of positions, even with multimillionaires. There is nothing inherently valuable in mere money worth striving for, unless it is to be administered as a sacred trust for the good of others. Otherwise, the moderate competence suffices to give honored old age the crown. End of section 12 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. Recording by Tom Carroll.
Section 13 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in September 2020. The Empire of Business, Section 13, Labor, the Upward March of Labor. The progress of man from the earliest day up to the present has been one steady march upward, now and then in diverse regions seemingly checked, receding for the moment, only to be swept onward again like the waves of the advancing tide. If it were still thought that the unknown had made man perfect, but with an instinct for his own degradation which ensured his fall, a call to return to the past would not have been astonishing. But when we in our enlightened age know that man is an outgrowth from lower orders of life, and has implanted within him the instinct which compels him to turn his face to the sun and slowly move upward toward that which is better, rejecting in his progress after test all that injures or debases, the call upon us by our socialistic friends to exchange the individualistic civilized present, which we have reached after many hundreds of thousands of years of progress, for the system of communism of the savage past, is indeed startling. There is no phase of human existence upon which we look today which does not show encouraging improvement over the past. This progress, made in obedience to the very nature of man, created to ascend in intelligence, tastes, and conduct, has made all the difference between the savage and the civilized being. Let us never forget that under present conditions the world has grown and is growing better, and we steadily approach nearer the ideal. Never was there so much of the spirit of brotherhood among men, never so much kindness, never so much help extended by men, and especially by women, to their less fortunate fellows. The writer scarcely knows a family intimately of which one or more members are not earnestly engaged, spending their time and means in doing good, thus giving not only their wealth, but themselves, to make brighter and better the lives of the less fortunate. There are many of his acquaintances treading the path that leads to making earth a heaven, less solicitous about heaven our home than hitherto, but more about making home our heaven here in this life. Many indeed in our day will merit the epitaph, "If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If there be none, he made the best of this." It is not therefore to the savage past that we should look for guidance. The part of wisdom is to hold fast to that which has proven itself good, and to keep on as we have been doing. Marching upward, the race is not led by the multitude, but by the few exceptional natures, just as all orders of vegetation have been and are improved by the exceptional plants, from the sour crab to the apple of today, from the love apple in America of the past generation to our succulent tomato. Exceptional plants arose, and from these came others. So in the animal kingdom, from the wolf came the collie dog, from a five-toed rude progenitor, the horse. All breeders perpetuate the best. Now in this progress the laborer has not failed to share with the employer. If we contrast what he is with what he was, the difference is great. He was once a slave, then a serf who did manual labor. Up to a century ago he was still a villein and was sold with the mine. That is, he could not leave it without the consent of the proprietor. Till recent times he was not paid in cash. Now he is a freeman and sells the labor the mine owner buys, both equally independent. In Dunfermline, some time ago, the writer visited the cottage gardens, for which prizes are given, with the secretary of the Horticultural Society, who is a working coal miner and a credit to labor. He remarked that the masters and miners were that day conferring upon the wage question. Only 100 years ago, the writer replied, your forefathers would have been transferred with the mines in case of sale. Now masters and men meet today as equals, buyers and sellers. What would be thought if the masters proposed a return to the old conditions? With a twinkle in the eye, never to be forgotten, came the words, "Aye, there would be two at that bargain, I'm thinking." With their trade unions, cash payments, masters of themselves and their labor, it is clear that working men have shared in the general advance. The wand of progress has not passed them by untouched, nor are we without evidence that the march of their improvement is not to stop. Following the same course with labor as with wealth, the writer will make free use of what he has said in years gone by, rather than give his views in new form, since they remain today substantially as they were then expressed. From An Employer's View of the Labor Question, Forum, April 1886, quote, The influence of trades unions upon the relations between the employer and employed have been much discussed. Some establishments in America have refused to recognize the right of the men to form themselves into these unions, although I am not aware that any concern in England would dare to take this position. This policy, however, may be regarded as only a temporary phase of the situation. The right of the workingman to combine and to form trades unions is no less sacred than the right of the manufacturer to enter into associations and conferences with his fellows, and it must be sooner or later conceded. Indeed, it gives one but a poor opinion of the American workman if he permits himself to be deprived of the right which his fellow in England has conquered for himself long since. My experience has been that trades unions, upon the whole, are beneficial both to labor and to capital. They certainly educate the working men and give them a truer conception of the relations of capital and labor than they could otherwise form. The ablest and best workmen eventually come to the front in these organizations, and it may be laid down as a rule that the more intelligent the workman, the fewer the contests with employers. It is not the intelligent workman, who knows that labor without his brother capital is helpless, but the blatant, ignorant man who regards capital as the natural enemy of labor, who does so much to embitter the relations between employer and employed, and the power of this ignorant demagogue arises chiefly from the lack of proper organization among the men through which their real voice can be expressed. This voice will always be found in favor of the judicious and intelligent representative. Of course, as men become intelligent, more deference must be paid to them personally and to their rights, and even to their opinions and prejudices. And upon the whole, a greater share of profits must be paid in the day of prosperity to the intelligent than to the ignorant workman. He cannot be imposed upon so readily. On the other hand, he will be found much readier to accept reduced compensation when business is depressed, and it is better in the long run for capital to be served by the highest intelligence, and to be made well aware of the fact that it is dealing with men who know what is due to them, both as to treatment and compensation. I therefore recognize in trades unions, or better still, in organizations of the men of each establishment, who select representatives to speak for them, a means not of further embittering the relations between employer and employed, but of improving them. It is astonishing how small a sacrifice upon the part of the employer will sometimes greatly benefit the men. I remember that at one of our meetings with the committee, it was incidentally remarked by one speaker that the necessity of obtaining credit at the stores in the neighborhood was a grave tax upon the men. An ordinary workman, he said, could not afford to maintain himself and family for a month, and as he only received his pay monthly, he was compelled to obtain credit and to pay exorbitantly for everything. Whereas if he had the cash, he could buy in Pittsburgh at 25% less. Well, I said, why cannot we overcome that by paying every 2 weeks? The reply was, we did not like to ask it because we have always understood that it would cause much trouble, but if you can do that, it will be worth an advance of 5% in our wages. We have paid semi-monthly since. To avoid the excessive prices of the small stores, I suggested a cooperative society, which was promptly formed, the first in the region. Another speaker happened to say that although they were in the midst of coal, the price charged for small lots delivered at their houses was a certain sum per bushel. The price named was double what our best coal was costing us. How easy for us to deliver to our men such coal as they required and charge them cost. This was done without a cent lost to us, but with much gain to the men. Several other points similar to these have arisen, by which their labors might be lightened or products increased, and others suggesting changes in machinery or facilities, which, but for the conferences referred to, would have been unthought of by the employer, and probably never asked for by the men. For these and other reasons, I attribute the greatest importance to an organization of the men, through whose duly elected representatives the managers may be kept informed from time to time of their grievances and suggestions. No matter how able the manager, the clever workman can often show him how beneficial changes can be made in the special branch in which that workman labors. Unless the relations between manager and workman are not only amicable but friendly, the owners miss much, nor is any man a first-class manager who has not the confidence and respect and even the admiration of his workmen. No man is a true gentleman who does not inspire the affection and devotion of his servants. Whatever the future may have in store for labor, the evolutionist who sees nothing but certain and steady progress for the race will never attempt to set bounds to its triumphs, even to its final form of complete and universal industrial cooperation, which I hope is some day to be reached. The following extract is from an address delivered on opening the library presented to the workmen of Homestead, 1898. Quote, "A partnership of 3 is required in the industrial world when an enterprise is planned. The first of these, not in importance but in time, is capital. Without it, nothing costly can be built. From it comes the first breath of life into matter previously inert. The structures reared by outside workmen, equipped and ready to begin in any line of industrial activity. The second partner comes into operation. That is, business ability. Capital has done its part. It has provided all the instruments of production, but unless it can command the services of able men to manage the business, all that capital has done crumbles into ruin. Then comes the third partner in the works, last in order of time, but not least, skilled labor. If it fail to perform its part, nothing can be accomplished. Capital and business ability brought into play without it are dead. The wheels cannot revolve unless skilled labor starts them. Now, volumes can be written as to which of the 3 partners is first, second, or third in importance, and the subject will remain just as it was before. Political economists, speculative philosophers, and preachers have been giving their views on the subject for hundreds of years, but the answer has not yet been found, nor can it ever be, because each of the 3 is all-important, and everyone is equally essential to the other 2. Labor, capital, and ability are a 3-legged stool. There is no first, second, or last. There is no precedence. They are equal members of the great triple alliance which moves the industrial world. We have seen the position which labor has reached in our day. Employee and employer meet upon equal terms. It was the writer's province to confer with labor for 26 years, and the more he knew of the workingmen, the higher they rose in his estimation and regard. Sometimes, but not often, the worker may be misled by extreme men, but as a rule, a majority can always be depended upon to be fair and reasonable. The following are extracts from an article this writer published in the Forum, April and August, 1886. Quote, "A strike or lockout is in itself a ridiculous affair. Whether a failure or a success, it gives no direct proof of its justice or injustice. In this it resembles war between 2 nations. It is simply a question of strength and endurance between the contestants. The gauge or battle of the duel is not more senseless as a means of establishing what is just and fair than an industrial strike or lockout. It would be folly to conclude that we have reached any permanent adjustment between capital and labor until strikes and lockouts are as much things of the past as the gauge of battle or the duel have become in the most advanced communities. Among the expedients suggested for their better reconciliation, the first place must be assigned to the idea of cooperation, or the plan by which the workers are to become part owners in enterprises and share their fortunes. There is no doubt that if this could be effected, it would have the same beneficial effect upon the workman which the ownership of land has upon the man who has hitherto tilled the land for another. The sense of ownership would make of him more of a man as regards himself, and hence more of a citizen as regards the commonwealth. While public sentiment has rightly and unmistakably condemned violence, even in the form for which there is the most excuse, I would have the public give due consideration to the terrible temptation to which the working man on a strike is sometimes subjected. To expect that one dependent upon his daily wage for the necessaries of life will stand by peaceably and see a new man employed in his stead is to expect much. This poor man may have a wife and children dependent upon his labor. Whether medicine for a sick child or even nourishing food for a delicate wife is procurable depends upon his steady employment. In all but a very few departments of labor it is unnecessary, and I think improper, to subject men to such an ordeal. In the case of railways and a few other employments, it is of course essential for the public wants that no interruption occur, and in such case substitutes must be employed. But the employer of labor will find it much more to his interest, wherever possible, to allow his works to remain idle and await the results of a dispute, than to employ the class of men that can be induced to take the place of other men who have stopped work. Neither the best men as men, nor the best men as workers, are thus to be obtained. There is an unwritten law among the best workmen, thou shalt not take thy neighbor's job. No wise employer will lightly lose his old employees. Length of service counts for much in many ways. Calling upon strange men should be the last resort. This writer never attempted to run works with new men. In his opinion, strikes generally arise not so much owing to disputes about wages as to the lack of knowledge of the one party by the other. The employer does not know the men and their point of view and their troubles, and the men do not know their employer and his troubles. Neither does the employer know the virtues of the working man, nor the working man the good qualities of the employer. Each looks only at one side of the problem. Lack of proper recognition of the workers by the employers as fellow men causes most of the labor disputes. In domestic service, where the two classes, employer and employed, do get to know each other as men and women, there are few quarrels, simply because each finds the other possessed of many endearing traits. Few are the families in which are not found valued servants living in their old age as members of the household, or pensioned and living nearby in their cottages, often visited. The final relation between capital and labor. Labor and capital partners. While we have said that labor has shared in the progress of the race, considering from whence it started to the position it now occupies, it cannot be claimed that conditions are satisfactory as they exist. In the future, labor is to rise still higher. The joint stock form opens the door to the participation of labor as shareholders in every branch of business. In this, the writer believes, lies the final and enduring solution of the labor question. The Carnegie Steel Company made a beginning by making from time to time 40-odd young partners. Only one was related to the original partners, but all were selected on their proved merits after long service. None contributed a penny. Their notes were accepted, payable only out of the profits of the business. Great care was taken to admit workers of the mechanical department, which had hitherto been neglected by employers. The first time a superintendent of one of the works was made a partner attracted attention, but as we kept on admitting men who had risen from their ranks as mechanics, we found it more and more advantageous. The superintendents now sat in conference at the board with the managers in the office. From this policy sprang the custom of bonuses awarded yearly to men in subordinate positions who had done exceptional work. This class naturally felt that they were on the upward road to admission as partners, their feet upon the ladder. The problem presented by the combination of many steel works into the one United States Steel Corporation was not altogether new, for individual and corporate management have coexisted since joint stock companies were formed. The former had undoubtedly great advantages over the latter. Able men managing their own works in competition with large bodies of shareholders employing salaried managers were certain to distance their corporate competition, and did so. Nothing can stand against the direct management of owners. The United States Steel Corporation realized this and, as a substitute, resolved to adopt the policy of interesting its officers and employees in its shares. Some plan of profit sharing was soon seen to present the best, and indeed the only, substitute for individual management. This idea the writer highly approved in his presidential address to the Iron and Steel Institute in London in 1903, but ventured to point out one serious defect. The investments in the shares of the company proposed to the men were to be at the risk of the purchasers. We added that this seems a feature we may, however, expect the corporation to change as experience is gained. Every employee, a shareholder, would prevent most of the disputes between capital and labor, and this chiefly because of the feeling of mutuality which would be created, now, alas, generally lacking. To effect this, every corporation could well afford to sell shares to its saving workmen, giving preference in payment at cost as a first charge in case of disaster, just as present laws provide first for the mechanic's lien and for homestead exemption. This is due to the workingman, who necessarily buys the shares without knowledge, and he is asked to buy them not solely for his own advantage, but for the benefit of the company as well, the advantage of both. This view, as expressed by the writer in the address referred to, we rejoice to say has been adopted by the Steel Corporation, and its last offer of shares guarantees the men against loss. The managerial department is given bonuses every year upon the profits of the concern. All this was hailed by the writer with intense delight, as in his daydreams he had often meditated upon the plan of employees becoming joint owners with himself and partners. Perhaps he may be permitted to quote from the address referred to, May 1903, London. Quote, I cannot speak too highly of this experiment, nor give the Steel Company too much credit for making it, since it is declared to be in the experimental stage, and subject to future improvement, as all new schemes should be. Its able and progressive author, Mr. George W. Perkins, is to be heartily congratulated. Thus we see, gentlemen, that the world moves on step by step toward better conditions. Just as the mechanical world has changed and improved, so the world of labor has advanced from the slavery of the laborer to the day of his absolute independence, and now to this day when he begins to take his proper place as the capitalist partner of his employer. We may look forward with hope to the day when it shall be the rule for the workman to be partner with capital, the man of affairs giving his business experience, the workman in the mill his mechanical skill to the company, both owners of the shares and so far equally interested in the success of their joint efforts, each indispensable, and without whose cooperation success would be impossible. It is a splendid vista along which we are permitted to gaze. Perhaps I may be considered much too sanguine in this forecast, which no doubt will take time to realize. But as the result of my experience, I am convinced that the huge combination and even the moderate corporation has no chance in competition with the partnership which embraces the principal officials and has adopted the system of payment by bonus or reward throughout its works. The latter may be relied upon, as a rule, to earn handsome dividends in times of depression, during which the former, conducted upon the old plan, will incur actual loss and perhaps land in financial embarrassment. In speaking of corporations, we must not forget, however, that there are many which are corporations in name only, their management being the life work of few owners. These rank with partnerships, having all the advantages of this form. The true corporation is that whose shares are upon the stock exchange, and whose real owners change constantly and are often unknown even to the president and directors, while to the workmen they are mere abstractions. It is impossible to infuse through their ranks the sentiment of personal regard and loyalty in all its wonderful power. The step taken by the United States Steel Corporation is therefore no surprise to me, for I have long believed that such corporations would be compelled to adopt the best attainable substitute for the personal factor of the older system, or suffer. In the sagacious policy of the United States Steel Corporation, I see proof of that opinion. Nor can I suggest a better form than that it has adopted, always provided the workingman shareholder be secured against loss. In the percentage allotted by the plan to reward exceptional officials, we have for the huge corporation perhaps the best substitute attainable for the magic of partnership, which nothing, however, can approach. The reward of department officials may readily be secured under this provision. In the bonus granted yearly upon shares held by the employees, we have proof of regard for them which cannot but tell, and the distribution of shares in the concern among them gives an advantage which so far no partnership even has enjoyed. The latter will no doubt adopt the plan, or find some equivalent, for the workingman owning shares in absolute security will prove much more valuable than one without such interest, and many incidental advantages will accrue to the company possessed of numerous shareholding employees who may some day see their representatives welcomed to the board of directors. This would prove most conducive to harmony, knowledge of each other on the part of owners and workmen being the best preventive of dissatisfaction. If the investment of the workers' savings be made secure, the rapid extension of the plan seems certain, and can be hailed with unalloyed satisfaction. But in its present form it is obviously incapable of general application, since the officials of few corporations could or would incur the responsibility of inducing their workmen to invest in their shares as a security, and few corporations could or should inspire the needed confidence of labor that these are to enjoy an unbroken career of prosperity, for such has not been the history of manufacturing concerns generally, especially in our field, to which we may well apply the well-known lines of Hudibras. Ah me, what perils do environ the man that meddles with cold iron. The idea of making workmen shareholders and dividing a percentage of the profits among those rendering exceptional service will probably encounter the opposition of the extremists on both sides, the violent revolutionist of capitalistic conditions, and the narrow, grasping employer, whose creed is to purchase his labor as he does his materials, paying the price agreed upon and ending there. But this opposition will, we believe, amount to little. It will even speak well for the new idea if scouted by the extremists and commended by the mass of men who are on neither dangerous edge, but in the middle, where usually lies wisdom. Meanwhile, here is the germ of a promising plan, offered as a solution for one of the pressing problems of our age, which may prove capable of development. Let us receive, study, and discuss it with open mind. That the problem will be solved, and that the two factors are some day to live in friendly cooperation, let no one doubt. Human society bears a charmed life. It is immortal, and was born with the inherent power or instinct as a law of its being to solve all problems finally in the best form, and among these none more surely than that vexed question of our day, the relations between these Siamese twins, which must mutually prosper or mutually decay, employer and employed, capital and labor. $2.5 million worth of additional stock was offered by the steel company to workmen this year, 1908, and all taken, and 25,000 more of the employees applied for shares, many for one share only, and these are to be provided so that nearly 100,000 workmen of this company are soon to be shareholders, i.e., part owners having a right to vote with their fellow proprietors and sharing in the profits. These workers have their feet upon the ladder and are bound to rise. They are very likely to save and invest more and more. This is the answer, reached by evolution under present conditions, to pessimists and revolutionists, which our socialist friends should ponder well. The strict political economist of our day may look askance at the idea of a minimum wage and a guarantee for the workmen against loss upon their shares in companies in which they hold a minority interest. But whatever final form the merger of labor and capital may assume in the distant future, these features seem to be essential under present conditions. If taxation should be borne only according to ability to pay, it is not wholly unreasonable that the workmen should not be subject to loss, For having only a minimum wage, he has no ability to incur loss. The exemption of a stated sum from income tax in Britain and in America the exemption of the small homestead are examples of this principle. Should the workmen hold the majority of shares and really manage the business, exemption from sharing loss should cease. This is only a beginning. The Filene Stores of Boston, a shareholding company employing 700 to 900 men, has gone farthest of all in the direction of making its employees joint owners. The capital stock is held only by employees and is returned to the corporation at its value should the employee leave the service. Every share of stock belongs to someone working in the stores. The most important advance is that all questions are submitted to arbitration, not only complaints or disputes, but wages, scope of work, and tenure of employment. More than 400 cases of arbitration have arisen, and the result is that both managers and employees have been satisfied that this is the true plan. When an employee is discharged, he has the right to appeal to an arbitration board composed of fellow employees of different grades. All wage disputes have been satisfactorily settled. There is a profit-sharing department, having nothing to do with wages, which has been able to distribute varying amounts each year. There is also a welfare committee of the shareholders, which manages a clubhouse and maintains lunch and recreation rooms. The insurance committee furnishes 5 classes of assurance at cost. 2/3 of the workers are insured. The bank pays 5% upon deposits of employees, which are guaranteed by the corporation. The publication committee issues a monthly paper. Many features of a social and educational nature are enjoyed by the employees throughout the year, and an atmosphere has been produced of great value to the business and to the members. It may be added that the Filene stores are not excelled, if equaled, in making profits. Their goods are turned over 10 times some years, 6 or 7 times being the average, and the stores are among the foremost and best known in Boston. No doubt the brothers Filene are remarkable men and recognized leaders in this work, but we may expect their example to impress others, particularly since their profit-sharing and stock-owning plans have been vindicated by unusual success from every point of view, particularly in improving the relations between employers and employees. We are just at the beginning of profit-sharing, and the reign of working men proprietors, which many indications point to as the next step forward in the march of wage-paid labor to the higher stage of profit-sharing, joint partnership, workers with the hand and workers with the head paid from profits, no dragging of the latter down, but the raising of the former up. We never see a fishing fleet sail without hailing it, as the finest illustration of the perfect relationship which is one day to prevail between capital and labor generally. Every man in the ship from the capital down is a partner, paid by sharing in the profits of the catch, according to the value of his labor. Even the lowest paid, probably a young hand, not yet an able-bodied seaman, could be a partner in the business. Here is a field capable of immediate and wide extension, provided employers agree to fix a minimum wage sufficient to maintain economically the worker's household, and to this it is believed every fair-minded employer would gladly agree. So far we have a list of 189 manufacturing concerns in the United States which have welfare departments, sales of stock to workmen, or other modes of adding to their wages, or forms recognizing the community of interest between employers and employed. Gilman, in his book on profit-sharing, published in 1899, gave the following numbers of profit-sharing firms in the different countries of Europe. France, 120. Britain, 94. Germany, 47. Switzerland, 14. Italy, 8. Holland, 7. Belgium, 6. Austria-Hungary, 5. It will soon be the exception for employers upon a great scale to ignore this feature. 18 of the principal railroad companies in America have established systems of pensions for their employees as extra recompense, the cost borne exclusively by the corporations. The pension feature, like profit sharing, is making great headway and promises soon to be universal. So marches labor up the heights to equality with the millionaire as his partner in business. This ends my quotation from the presidential address to the Iron and Steel Institute in 1903. It will be seen that the writer's views are not of yesterday. He has had considerable experience with the labor problem and thought much over it. Whether the communist's ideal is to be finally reached upon earth, after man is so changed that self-interest, which is now the mainspring of human action, will give place to heavenly neighbor interest, cannot be known. The future has not been revealed. He who says yes and he who says no are equally foolhardy. Neither knows, therefore neither should presume to consider, much less to legislate in their day, for a future they can know nothing of. Endowed as man is with the instinct for improvement, fortunately no limit to his march toward perfection can be set, but what perfection is to be we know not. The writer, however, believes one point to be clear, that is, that the next step toward improved labor conditions is through the stage of shareholding in the industrial world, the workman becoming joint owner in the profits of his labor. Payment to slaves and serfs, by providing shelter and food and clothing for them, then by orders upon the stores for articles, up to payment by cash to independent workmen today, each a great step forward, have all been tried, and now the coming day dawns when payment is to be made wholly or in part by profit-sharing, the workman having the status of the share-owning official and a voice in management as joint owner. He will be guaranteed a minimum wage, when finally paid by profits entirely, to keep his mind easy and free for his work, the proper support of himself and of his family being thus ensured. It may be mentioned that the investments of workmen partners in the United States Steel Corporation have been very profitable to both the men and the company. To the sober-minded workmen we say again, hold fast to that which has proved itself good. Keep marching upon the path of decided and continuous progress, a progress which can be proved by simply glancing backward to conditions under which labor started, when work was the part of slaves, and contrasting these with its present independent position. We have traced the progress of labor upward under present conditions from slavery to partnership with capital. What the working man has to consider, and to consider well, is whether this be not the most advantageous path for him to continue to tread. So far as it has been tried, it has proved a decided success, and it can easily be continued, since it is proving mutually beneficial to capital and labor. One of the greatest advantages, the writer thinks, will be found in drawing men and managers into closer intercourse, so that they become friends and learn each other's virtues. For that both have virtues, none knows better than the writer, who has seen both sides of the shield as employee and employer. We only hate those we do not know, says the French proverb. There is much truth in this. In vast establishments, it is very difficult, almost impossible, for workmen and employers to know each other, but when the managers and workmen are joint owners, and both paid wages, as even the president of the company is, we shall see greater intercourse between them. In the case of disputes, it is certain that the workmen partners have a status nothing else can give. They can attend all shareholders' meetings, and have a voice there if desired. Entrance into the partnership class means increased power to workmen. On the other hand, knowledge of the company's affairs, its troubles and disappointments, which come at intervals to the most successful concerns, will teach the workman much that he did not know before. Co-partnership tends to bring a realizing sense of the truth to both labor and capital, that their interests, broadly considered, are mutual, and as far as the latter is concerned, it may finally, in some cases, be all furnished by those engaged in the works, which is the ideal that should be held in view. The workman, both capitalist and worker, employee and employer. This, however, is not for our time. We are only pioneers, whose duty is to start the movement, leaving to our successors its full and free development as human society advances. The first company so owned will mark a new era in the relations of labor and capital. We may not have to wait long for this experiment, since it is in line with recent developments. The writer has no desire to embark again in business, but nothing would appeal to him so strongly as this ideal. He should like to address a body of workmen, many thousands in number, as all fellow partners. He addresses 40-odd at dinner once every year by that endearing term, partners of his youth and dear friends of his old age. Only 2 ever put $1 in the business. All the others, many of them workingmen, earned their shares by brilliant service. Most of them are dollar millionaires. All are rich. Thus is labor soon to attain its deserved place and recompense, and workmen and capitalists become one, the wage system, except a minimum, being displaced by division of profits. The foregoing was written before the following by John Stuart Mill attracted the writer's attention. Quote, "The form of association, however, which, if mankind continue to improve, must be expected in the end to predominate, is not that which can exist between a capitalist as chief and work people without a voice in the management, but the association of the laborers themselves on terms of equality, collectively owning the capital with which they carry on their operations, and working under managers elected and removable by themselves." Footnote: This quote is from John Stuart Mill's Political Economy. It is most encouraging that so great an authority as Mill foresaw that the ideal condition of the future lay not in state-owned factories and mines, uniform wages to workmen, and the abolition of private capital, as socialists urge, but in uniting the workman and the capitalist in one and the same person. The writer is convinced that this is to be the highly satisfactory and final solution. The first step in advance has already come in the natural progress of evolution, no revolution necessary, and it is earnestly pressed upon the attention of the intelligent working man and his leaders, some of whom seem to have been misled into devoting themselves to the advocacy of a system, admittedly unsuited to our day, which requires an organic change in the relations of society, and indeed involves a complete revolution in the nature of man, the task of 1,000 years. The experiment of labor and capital union, workmen, capitalists, has exceeded so far all expectations. Even the convinced socialist might therefore hail it as at least a step in the right direction, making labor's position better than before, saying to himself, "Let the future bring what it may, a bird in the hand is often worth more than a whole flock in the bush. Our socialistic remedy is for the future. Let us not forget this in our dealings with the present." Such seems to the writer the part of wisdom. End of section 13. Labor.
Section 14 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joanne Turner. The Empire of Business, Section 14, Wages. The 2 schools of socialism, evolutionary and revolutionary, differ upon the crucial question of wages, although it is fundamental and must be settled one way or the other, for until it is, what socialism really means cannot be known. If wages are not to be equal, all classes cannot be merged and kept uniform, the basis of socialism. We quote from several socialistic sources. quote, socialism forbids the future use of property as private means of production or private source of income, and thus necessarily puts an end to inequalities of income, unquote. Quote, socialism is that mode of social life which, based upon the recognition of the natural brotherhood and unity of mankind, would have land and capital owned by the community collectively and operated cooperatively for the equal good of all, unquote. Quote, our aim, one and all, is to obtain for the whole community complete ownership and control of the means of transport, the means of manufacture, the mines, and the land. Thus, we look to put an end forever to the wage system, to sweep away all distinctions of class, and eventually to establish national and international communism on a sound basis, unquote. Quote, the land, being the storehouse of the necessaries of life, should be declared and treated as public property. The capital necessary for industrial operations should be owned and used collectively. Work and wealth resulting therefrom should be equitably distributed over the population, unquote. Quote, controversy, unquote, writes Mrs. Annie Besant, quote, will probably arise as to the division. Shall all the shares be equal, or shall the workers receive in proportion to the supposed dignity or indignity of their work? Inequality, however, would be odious. The impossibility of estimating the separate value of each man's labor with any really valid result, the friction which would arise, the jealousies which would be provoked, the inevitable discontent, favoritism, and jobbery that would prevail, all these things will drive the communal council into the right path, equal remuneration of all workers, unquote. Quote, socialism we believe to be the next step in the evolution of that form of state which will give the individual the fullest and freest room for expansion and development. State socialism, with all its drawbacks, and these I frankly admit, will prepare the way for free communism, in which the rule, not merely the law of the state, but the rule of life, will be from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs, unquote. Notwithstanding the foregoing, Mr. Hardy ventures to aver in another place that, quote, the socialist state, therefore, will have good reason to honor the inventor, and will have a direct interest in rewarding him as a public benefactor, unquote. If already honored, one wonders what form further reward could take without differentiating him from others. Upon the other side, we quote from Mr. Jowett's booklet in the Labor Ideals series, The Socialist and the City, pages 17, 18, and 19. This deliverance is so vitally important that we give it at length. Quote, at present, all the larger corporations are trying to monopolize for their own service a number of experts insufficient to go round. The result is that some of them are paying first-class salaries for second- or third-class men. There will be no need for this when cities cease to compete with each other, and one may naturally expect that socialist cities would abolish this least vestige of competition still remaining between different municipal corporations. The associated corporations will be able to pay sufficiently large salaries, and each individual corporation requiring a specialist's assistance might pay consultation fees into a common pool. Joint action in this direction will tend to steady the movements of experts and officials, and for the rest, it should be looked upon as a discreditable proceeding on the part of a man holding, say, a responsible post as engineer, surveyor, architect, or other similar profession, to transfer his services after committing the community to some large scheme involving great outlay until the work is sufficiently near completion for the responsibility to be properly placed in case of failure. It is no part of the socialist plan to run municipal concerns under the control of the managerial leavings of private enterprise, for that way disaster lies." Unquote. Here we have a revelation. Nothing new is to be obtained by Mr. Jowett's brand of socialism, except that socialistic cities are to combine, which they do not do under present conditions, and agree not to offer a higher reward for labor, thus robbing other cities of their valuable men. No competition for labor. Valuable men are to be compelled to remain where they are. No chance of escape. What do our friends of labor think of this? Ability, as today, will look for and receive high rewards, and cities through their governors will condescend to combine to thwart service receiving the reward which, under the free play of forces, it would command. In The Necessary Basis of Society, Contemporary Review, June 1908, page 664, Mr. Sidney Webb, who tells us he is a socialist, writes as follows, quote, "The most democratic government of the ensuing century, based, as it must necessarily be, on the very idea of providing for each of the series of minorities of which the world is made up, is as likely to provide for one minority as for another, for its poets as for its apprentices, for its scientists as for its soldiers, for its artists as for its artificers, and with the advance of actual knowledge in the administration is even more likely to know how they can be fostered and really well provided for than the irresponsible plutocratic patron ever did." Unquote. Another eminent authority, Mr. H. G. Wells, in his recent book, differs from both sides quoted. The state is not to take over all branches of industrial production, but only half. He declares, quote, "A little moiety, or little short of a moiety, of the business of such a country as England must always be in the hands of men who are the masters of their own enterprises, and are not the salaried officials of any larger organization whatsoever. Labor is not to be paid equal wages or according to its needs. Socialism does not propose to abolish competition, as many hasty and foolish antagonists declare. If the reader has gone through what has preceded this, he will know that this is not so. Socialism trusts to competition for the service and improvement of the world, and in order that competition between man and man may have free play, socialism seeks to abolish one particular form of competition, the competition to get and hold property, even to marry property, that degrades our present world. But it would leave men free to compete for fame, for service, for salaries, for position and authority, for leisure, for love and honor." Unquote. Socialism must either establish equality of wages, for thus only can it maintain uniformity of living, or retain the present system of inequality of wages involving variety of living. If the former were adopted, human life would be changed, with results unknown. No wonder Mr. Hardy relegates the consideration of that question to the future, for he is undoubtedly right in saying man is not today prepared for such a change. Those whose services command more than the common laborer would not agree. Such is human nature as it stands today, and the idea of uniform income may be dismissed until the nature of man changes. On the other hand, if different wages be paid according to service rendered, socialism becomes impossible. As Mr. Spargo says, quote, "There must be approximate equality of income, otherwise class formations must take place, and the old problems incidental to economic inequality reappear." Unquote. Here is a step which socialism must overleap or else fall down. Mr. Ramsay MacDonald, MP, is a philosophic socialist who writes well. He tells us, quote, "If the socialist state is ever to come, it is not by a sudden change in economic and personal relationships, but by a steady readjustment of existing relationships until the organic structure has been completely altered." Unquote. Never were truer words written. Would that all socialists apprehended that they are fatal to the realization of the socialistic state with its uniform incomes and abolition of private property, not only during our time, but until or unless, quote, "the organic structure be completely altered." Unquote. Man's progress in the past has been steady, and he has traveled upward from savagery, but long is the road and devious the way to complete change of the organic structure of the economic and personal relationships of human society. Yet this must be reached before socialism as a system can be introduced. Strange that such men as we have quoted, fit for leaders of their fellows in assaults upon the numerous evils of our day, should waste their powers upon a system which they admit cannot be adopted until organic changes take place in the structure of human society. We have before us the work of our own day and generation, and only this can we push forward during our lives. To this it is our duty to devote ourselves, leaving the work of the distant future to our successors. Rare are the men capable of dealing wisely with the needs of their own time. Even with these, their success is often not surprisingly brilliant. We have not been blessed with men capable of legislating properly for generations to come. They do not and cannot exist. Meanwhile, in view of the conflicting views expressed, we shall surely be excused for asking the socialists for an authoritative answer to the question whether socialism involves equal wages, or whether the present individualistic mode of payment according to service rendered is to be retained, or Mr. Wells's half and half system to be adopted. The most devoted disciple of socialism must realize that this constitutes one of the two vital differences between the individualistic and socialistic systems, the other being the right of private property, that it is fundamental and lies at the root of the whole matter. No equal wages, no socialism possible. Equal wages, no individualism possible. Half equal and half unequal wages, endless confusion. We leave the revolutionary, the evolutionary, and the half and half socialists to study the problem and decide. Until it is solved, socialism remains a mere babble of words signifying nothing, for this is not a mere incident in its progress. It stands at the threshold and demands settlement. End of section 14.
Section 15 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Wayne Cook. The Empire of Business, Section 15, Thrift. The socialistic system, as we shall see, does not harmonize with our present home and family relations, which many of us treasure for their holy and ennobling influence upon human life, as the most precious of all institutions. We find that it also attacks or belittles one of the virtues which, as we believe, lies at the root of the progress of our race, that of thrift. Most men and women are born to poverty. Comparatively few are provided for and free to spend lives of ease. The vast majority must work to live. Fortunately for himself, in all probability, Keir Hardie is no exception. If he had been one of the few born to competence, he might never have attained eminence through service to his fellows. In his booklet in the Labor Ideals series, page 38, after writing that the Sermon on the Mount is fully of the spirit of pure socialism, he continues, quote, "Nay, in its lofty contempt for thrift and forethought, it goes far in advance of anything ever put forward by any communist, ancient or modern." End quote. Thrift cannot commend itself to the true socialist, who forbids private capital, but the story of the talent hidden in the ground inculcates the duty of man not only to guard his capital, but to increase it, and we are told that, quote, "He that provides not for those of his own house hath denied the faith, and is worse than an infidel." End quote. Proper provision certainly requires a reserve fund for contingencies. If we were to divide the vast army of workers of mature age into two classes, the savers and the spendthrifts, we should practically separate the credible from the discreditable, the exemplary from the pitiable, the progressive from the backsliders, the sober from the intemperate. A visit to their respective homes would confirm this classification. The thrifty would be found not only the best workmen and foremost in the shop, but the best citizens and the best husbands and fathers, the leaders and exemplars of their fellows. Many are those who have risen from the ranks of manual labor and achieved reputation for useful work performed for the community, and have been held in general esteem as model citizens. Much good have they accomplished for their fellows. That they were thrifty, thoughtful men goes without saying. They could not otherwise have risen. If the workmen depositors in savings banks, members of friendly and of building societies, cooperative stores, and similar organizations were to march in procession, preceded by the workmen who are not, spectators would take heart again after their depression from seeing the first. If the workmen who own their homes were to march, and to be followed by those who do not, the contrast in appearance would be striking. Apply to the masses of men any of the tests that indicate success or failure in life, progress or stagnation, valuable or worthless citizenship, and none will more clearly than that of thrift separate the well-behaved, respected, and useful from the unsatisfactory members of society. The writer lived in his early years among workmen and his later years as an employer of labor, and it is incomprehensible to him how any informed man, having at heart the elevation of manual laboring men, could fail to place upon the habit of thrift the highest value, second only to that of temperance, without which no honorable career is possible, for against intemperance no combination of good qualities can prevail. Temperance and thrift are virtues which act and react upon each other, strengthening both, and are seldom found apart. The pure, elevating, happy home, with wife and children, is the product of both. When some part of the weekly earnings is not saved, all is not as well with that home as could be wished. End of section 15.